Season 19 is here and there have been some slight buffs and nerfs, so it's time to make a new weapon tier list. And as always, just keep in mind, we won't go over any care package guns because they are obviously 3x S tier and I think we all know how good they are. But first, if you do want to improve faster and get more in-depth guides, make sure to head over to the GameLeap website where we have literally hundreds of guides to help you improve faster. Guides covering fundamentals, advanced movement techniques, advanced legend tutorials, gameplay breakdowns, legend abilities, legend strategies, and so much more. We spend a lot of time and do our best to give full analytical breakdowns that will actually help you in whatever goal it is that you have in the game. So if you actually want to learn faster and become insane at the game, I highly recommend you join the GameLeap family to get instant access to all of these in-depth guides by checking out the link in the description below. Alright, starting with the D tier, we have the RE45 and P2020. As fun as these guns may be to use, unfortunately they are just lackluster. They require a gold hop up to do anything at all, and there is objectively no reason to take them over any other close range weapon. The only thing that might make them a choice is because of the ease of use, but when you have the Volt and Alternator, which do more damage, have better range, have more versatility, and are easier to use, the pistols remain in D tier. Next up is the C tier, which consists of the Rampage and Spitfire. Some LMGs are looking a little better this time around with some of the recent changes, however the Spitfire and Rampage are not passengers on that boat. LMGs can be oppressive simply due to their high damage per magazine, but that is not the case when you are coming up to mid and close range fights, and in fact they lose a lot of power in these ranges, which a majority of fights take place. They can be easier for beginner players to use since it has a large magazine to help when you are missing shots, but that doesn't matter if you come up against a player who has better aim and is using a gun with higher damage output and versatility. The Rampage is awful unless you use thermite grenades, and the Spitfire is just the Alternator without the fun. The Alternator has way faster movement speed, still has a really high damage per magazine, for SMGs at least. It has a faster reload speed, it has roughly the same DPS without the disruptor rounds, and is forgiving to newer players. So at range with a support legend, yes, these LMGs can work, but that's a bit too niche to really give them a higher ranking if you ask me. Next, we've got the Mozambique. This is actually a very fun gun to use, especially when you have all the attachments, and it can be very good without the attachments in the early game. Plus the hammer points are in the crafters, so it gets a little bit of bonus points this time around. Also has a faster ADS straight speed than shotguns or SMGs, and I think for most people, it's a little bit hard to be consistent with, and its overall burst potential is just way lower than the other shotguns, and that's why it falls down on the list, though I have to be honest, the more I think about it, the more I think we shouldn't really be comparing this to other shotguns. The same way we don't compare the Wingman to other snipers, but I guess that's a topic for another day. And as always, if you are a Maggie main, the Mozam is A tier for you because you get extremely fast movement speed when using it, but for everyone else, it's B tier. And that's simply because of its difficulty to use, requirement of the gold attachment, and lack of quote-unquote burst when comparing it to other quote-unquote shotguns. Next up, we've got the longbow, sentinel, and charge rifle. All of these weapons are usable and are great for poking, but all of them are slow, clunky, inconsistent, and they lack versatility. And Apex tends to be leaning towards the direction of consistency and versatility wins the game. I mean, think about it. Would you rather run up to most situations with a sniper and an SMG or an AR and an SMG? I mean, come on, the question answers itself. Clearly, the AR SMG combo is going to be more effective in close to mid range, which is where a majority of fights take place. Of course, I'm not saying snipers aren't useful because they are for what they do, poking to drain enemy resources and leveling Evo shield. If this was Warzone where a single headshot kills you, things would be different, but Apex has a long time to kill, fast movement, and snipers certainly don't kill you with a single headshot 99.9% of the time, meaning you have to consistently hit your shots by leading a target that is more wiggly than a toddler who has to pee but refuses to because they are in the middle of watching Barney the Dinosaur. Next up is the triple take, which is in a pretty okay state at the moment. It's not particularly amazing, but it's not the worst either. It's sort of just mid. It works okay as a close range weapon, but you are probably going to die to most SMGs and shotguns because it does not specialize in that. And it's sort of just okay at range as well. It's not as good as other options, but it's just not horrible either. Next up is the Devotion, and surprise, surprise, the L-Star. This season reverted the Devotion's nerf through the turbocharger, and the Devo does a scary amount of damage when using it. However, it still requires a hop up to make it really work, and it also eats through ammo insanely fast, so that in itself is already a problem. Plus, it's pretty hard to control, let's be real now. Now, it's also still an LMG, so it has all the other normal drawbacks to it as well, but it's certainly better than the previous two LMGs, that's for certain. Then we have the L-Star, a little bit of an anomaly this season. The L-Star is out of the care package, and it also receives some buffs, reducing the recoil significantly, overall improving the recoil pattern, increase in the damage from 17 to 16 per body shot, and improved barrel to even further reduce the recoil. This thing is like a laser now, and it is super easy to use. It has a much higher DPS than the other LMGs, besides the Devo of course, that being 170 DPS, which isn't all that bad, all things considered. I mean, the R301 only has 6 DPS more, and honestly, I think the L-Star is almost as easy to use as the R301. Maybe a little even easier, if we're not including like the weird mechanic thing, just purely based off of recoil. Now, when you take those factors into consideration and combine it with the fact that you technically never have to reload when used properly, that's what makes it higher on this list. You guys probably will think I'm crazy, but I do think the L-Star is going to see a lot more play and a lot more usage these days because of these changes. Also, because it no longer shoots comets as bright as the sun, completely obstructing your view of anything that's happening, but you know, that's in the past. We're past those days. And then finally, at the top of B tier is the Volt. Mathematically, the alternator with disruptor rounds on a target with max armor and damage them through their health actually makes it damage output about the same as the Volt, except with the alternator you get better hip fire and significantly higher damage per magazine. The gun is fun in early game, but it really starts to fall off fast compared to other SMGs. In case you're confused, I'm actually referring to the Volt. I know I was just talking about the alternator, but we're talking about the Volt again, all right? Back to the Volt. Now, if you have to choose between the alternator without disruptor rounds and the Volt, then the Volt is probably the better choice, which is why the Volt is probably the better choice in early game as well. However, at that point, you might as well just pick up a car or an R99. Let's be real. It is unfortunate that the Volt has fallen back from its glory days since it's nerfed to its bullet velocity, so it's not quite as good as range, and just all the changes have really brought it back down a bit. Hopefully, maybe we can see a small buff, just a little one, schmiggin, just a schmiggin. I don't know, I really like the Volt. All right, on to the A tier, starting with the shotguns. The EVA 8 is great if you have troubles with consistency when using shotguns, especially if you like to be smelling your enemy's armpits, considering how close you have to be to get anything done with this thing. Seriously, it's a problem. Really, that's its main drawback, and it probably should be in B tier because of this, but you know, the fact that you have to be so close really just takes it down a peg. But to be fair, shotguns are close range weapons, so most of the time you are in close range when using them, at least I hope you are. It just really sucks when the enemy takes a few steps away from you, then all of a sudden you are hitting them for 14 damage with 14 shots, almost killing them 14 times, only to die wondering why it took 14 shots at only 14 meters away from your target to accomplish nothing 14 times. Clearly, I speak from experience. Okay, all jokes aside though, the EVA 8 is very good when it comes to consistency if you are close enough, which you do have to be very close, because the spread is just so wide that it's very easy to miss pellets. So it really is teetering on the top of B tier, the bottom of A tier. I almost want to put it in top of B tier, but anyway, the Mastiff on the other hand gives you a little bit more range than the EVA, a little bit more burst potential, but also a little less consistency considering you are at the optimal ranges for both, of course. Now, while the PK gives the most burst potential, the most range, and the least consistency. Really, the shotguns are on a spectrum, and it's just going to come down to what you prefer. The EVA's range really makes it suffer, so I'd say it's the lowest of the three, but I think the Mastiff is my favorite pick at the moment because for some reason, I don't know why all of a sudden I just am not hitting PK shots anymore, and I feel like the Mastiff just has a nice balance of everything that a shotgun in Apex needs. Next, we got the Car SMG. Nothing has changed with the car, and it's still as good of a gun as last season. It has the benefits of versatility while being the second highest DPS weapon in the game, not considering the Devo, of course. It has a little bit of a higher damage per magazine than the R99 with slightly slower fire rate, meaning it's a bit more forgiving than the R99. Its horizontal recoil pattern is literally the opposite of the R99, so if you do struggle with the R99, maybe give the car a try. But yeah, it is still a really good gun to use, and it can definitely make it all the way to endgame for sure. The next is the alternator. Real quick, let's go through the math on this one. With disruptor rounds on an armored target, this gun does roughly 190 DPS, which is lower than the car SMG, but higher than the flatline. Its DPS drops to 160 on a target without armor. After the math is said and done, on a full armored target all the way through damaging them without armor, the alternator has about 468 damage per magazine, and everything balances out to roughly 180 DPS, which is the same as the Volt and the flatline. And really, the thing that sucks about this gun is that its bullet velocity is extremely slow, so it's not the best at range, making it less versatile. And of course, the fact that it requires disruptor rounds to really get it juicing, because without them, it's B tier at best, unfortunately. Overall, I think it is in a pretty good spot right now. It just sucks that, any gun that requires a hop up to make it really work, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. Now, next up is the G7. This gun is probably the best long-range gun for most players simply because of its ridiculous damage and fire rate, making it pretty forgiving overall. The only thing making it A tier rather than S tier is the fact that ARs are just so dominant at this time of the game. If the meta was more ranged heavy, then things would be different, but it's just so hard to beat the overall versatility of the ARs. And finally, we have the 30-30. I mean, what can I say? It's a crazy gun to use, basically just a wingman with more zoom and bullet velocity. And I think that's one of the things that makes this gun feel so good. Similar feel to the ever powerful wingman, but with higher velocity, making it more forgiving. The damage it can output is actually kinda nutty, especially when using skull piercer rounds, but honestly, you don't need it to make the gun work. And that's the beauty of the 30-30. The downside / upside of this gun is the stray speed. Now, clearly, as a marksman rifle, it's going to have that slower stray speed than an AR, and that's why it can get you killed. However, using this gun forces you to play more patiently and to really consider your positioning. Not many guns do that, if any at all. That's why I think it's even better, because even though it's not as versatile as an AR, it does something no other gun really does, and that's teach you not to go zug YOLO mode. You are highly rewarded for positioning how you should be positioning, regardless of the gun that you're using, yet harshly punished when you don't. It teaches a valuable lesson that all of us need to learn, especially me. Now, finally, there's the S tier. Really, at this point, all the ARs are sitting pretty comfy without any particular order, and it just comes down to what you prefer. Though, if I had to put them in order, I'd say the Hemlock, the R301, the Flatline, and finally the Nemesis at the top. The Hemlock got a slight nerf this season, but it didn't change the amount of burst required for a kill, that being 4 on a max armor target. Plus, the Hemlock mostly shines when you start adding headshots into the mix anyway, so. The R301 is easiest to use, but has a low damage per magazine for an AR. Also, the lower 176 DPS means you feel it if you miss. But it's hard to beat the consistency of this weapon overall, since it's basically just a laser beam. The Flatline is my personal favorite pick, and in my opinion, the best all-rounder. Higher damage per magazine, 180 DPS, no weird mechanics, works okay in close quarters. It just gets the job done no matter the situation. The downside being its recoil, but with the recoil aside, it's just good. It just does what it needs to do. You can always rely on it. It's just old faithful at the moment. The Nemesis is probably most people's pick these days, having the highest DPS when going full throttle and being really easy to use. At range at least. And that's the downside. It's probably the least versatile out of all the ARs because it really drops off in effectiveness as you get closer and closer to the enemy, because its hip fire is awful. And then finally, of course, it's the R99. This thing still has a very high one clip potential, and once you get used to the recoil, it's pretty easy to use. Then when you get the laser attachment, it makes it even easier to use in those close quarters fights, which a lot of your fights are going to be close quarters. It has the highest DPS in the game, and really its main downfall is that the damage per magazine is so low. So again, if you miss, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel it. But man, when you hit those shots, people literally just fall over so fast, it's hard to beat. Anyway, what did you think of this list? Do you agree? Let us know in the comments below. Okay, love you, bye.